Hello and welcome to the Seahawkers podcast. I'm Brandon Schultz. We are past the 2024 NFL draft. The Seahawks made their picks. We've got undrafted free agents, and we've got EJ Snyder back on the show at Football EJ of Bootleg Football. EJ, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be post-draft. It's a little bit of elation there. It's certainly a hilltop, a milestone for us, and getting past it feels very, very different. It feels a little bit easier to talk about the class.
It's almost like you don't have to just break down tape every single day anymore.
Stop. The PTSD will start again. No, it is like that. I do get to, enjoy my coffee a little bit more in the morning instead of pour it directly into whatever orifice is facing up and hope it works. It's fantastic. It was a lot of fun. The draft was really cool. I think this is a neat class. I'm excited to talk about it. And it's nice to be able to do it without the time pressure of there's only X days until the draft.
Well, and I know as a Bears fan, you've got to be pretty excited and happy about what they came away with. We can maybe save some of that for the end because I do want to get to our Seahawks picks. And
You bet.
I'm pretty excited about what our Seahawks were able to come away with, EJ, because as we watched live the draft board fall, and offensive player after offensive player came off the board, and we're sitting at number 16. And even at number 15, we're looking and seeing, there's still a lot of good defensive players still left on the board. Sure, maybe we need interior offensive linemen, but at this point, how does Mike Macdonald not pass up going defense with the number 16 pick? And John Schneider and Mike Macdonald, they take Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle from Texas.
It's a great pick, and it is exciting. It's funny, when I was flying to the combine, John Schneider was on my flight, and so I was DMing Matt Miller, and I said, "Hey, man, Schneider's on my flight." He said, "Airdrop him a picture of Byron Murphy." I was like, I don't think I'll be doing that, but that was way back in February, and they end up with him, and it's a really good fit for Mike Macdonald's defense. One of the best young ascending defenders in this class. Not necessarily the most productive if you're looking at stats, but if you look at film, he was the straw that stirred a lot of Texas's drink on defense. T'Vondre Sweat was certainly a help to him, but T'Vondre Sweat also, especially towards the end of the year, benefited from what Byron was doing, and all the other Seahawks defenders will benefit from him as well. So, a lot of people were talking about the size, but I think we're kind of getting to a tipping point, especially with pass rushers, where people realize you don't need to be 6'5" to do it. And sometimes if you happen to be 6 foot or 6'1" and have an explosive first step and be really powerful, it's even more trouble for big offensive linemen to deal with. Guys that are 6'6", 6'7", they have to bend down, and that's not their favorite thing to do. And if you talk to tall offensive linemen, they really don't like squatty little pass rushers that are fast. And it doesn't matter whether it's inside or outside. And Murphy fits that bill perfectly. Right about 6 foot, right about 300 pounds. Incredibly good burst off the ball. Really good, I'd say, lower half power. That helps him against the run too. He's got to polish up some of his run defense stuff, but like NFL decision makers crave interior pressure, because with all the 3-step drop passing game stuff, ball comes out really, really quick. Pass rushers don't get a full 2.5, 3 seconds to really run the arc and get around the outside. And the shortest path to them is right through the middle of the line. Get in their face, get your hands up, disrupt the play one way or another. And Byron Murphy can do that. And all those things lined up, Seahawks benefited from that big offensive run of players. And Murphy's a Seahawk, and it's going to be fun to watch him under Mike Macdonald.
Well, and you talk about him not quite having the production, and you look, up north a little bit, and Johnny Newton, and he was the guy who had all the production, but he did take quite a few more snaps than Murphy did. And yeah, if you kind of were to even things out or average things out, those two are pretty close.
Yeah, no, potential is the word, and it is the classic NFL draft question with, hey, if I add more water to this plant, will it grow faster and farther? And I think everybody that I talked to in the NFL was really pretty settled on, yeah, Murphy's one of those guys. If you add a little food and water in terms of snaps and a little bit more technique, you will see that production, because all the physical traits are there. You see the flashes again in, I'm not going to call it limited action, but certainly less action than Newton had. But
Yeah.
if we want to be fair about those stats, I'm not going to take any Johnny Newton slander, because he was wildly productive and it wasn't close. By far the most productive defensive tackle in this class.
If he would have still been there at 16 and Murphy would have come off the board sooner, I don't think I would have been opposed to it either.
No, it would have been a tremendous addition. Either way, both of those guys had very close rankings on my board, but it's funny how the perceptions differed of them around the league. And the thing I was fascinated, I don't tend to look at a lot of age unless it's outside the norm, unless you got a 26-year-old coming into the league. But the way everybody was talking about it like Murphy was the young guy who had all the potential, and Newton was the guy that had been playing forever and was sort of the grizzled veteran. They're like 4.5, 5 months apart. Like they're both 21.
Right.
I was like,
doesn't make sense.
Now I was like, okay, either way. Murphy's a very exciting player. I've seen him live a couple of times in the past 2 years. I saw him against UTSA 2 years ago. Saw him against Kansas this year. He had a good game both times. And, it was a lot of fun to watch that line with he and Sweat. They made a lot of problems for opposing offenses. And I think he's going to go right on doing that in Seattle.
I look forward to seeing what he can do with Leonard Williams, which is the reason why the Seahawks didn't have their second round pick. We had to wait from 16. They didn't trade back because I think of how the draft board fell. It was a little just too tempting to go ahead and take Murphy rather than trade back. So then they have to wait all the way to round 3, pick number 81. And that's where they get Christian Haynes, the guard out of Connecticut.
And you do say guard. It's so funny in this class because there's so many like, oh, what does he play? Oh, he's tackle guard hybrid. Oh, he's a guard center hybrid. Oh,
we took a guard who plays guard, EJ.
Oh man, did you take a guard who plays guard? You took a right guard, by the way. Make sure to say right guard. He took every snap in college at right guard.
Right.
Like everyone.
Although Judge Snyder did say he wasn't quite sure where they were going to play him, but I do
guess
have a
what?
feeling
You're going to play that guy at right guard.
At right guard.
He's the only guy in this draft like that was just like, you're looking up his stat counts and you're like, wait, what? He never had to slide over to tackle because of an injury.
Took 5 snaps at Senior Bowl, EJ. Maybe you could compete there.
Sure. And it's possible. Some guys, and we'll talk about one once we get to the UDFA class that's coming to Seattle, that I reached out to and said, hey, can you play right? And he was like, yep. Some guys have no problem with it whatsoever. But Christian Haynes is unique in the fact that he is a guard's guard. He is a right guard's guard, to be specific. But he's one of those classic sort of calm demeanor off the field. On the field, one of the best finishers in this class. And he plays mean. He plays to the echo of the whistle. He loves rolling over guys, is a people mover, can root out very large, powerful players, has a tremendous, I would just say, core strength to him. Very, very strong player. I think was a little bit underrated because he played at UConn and people didn't really sort of start warming up to him until post Senior Bowl.
I don't particularly care for guys who get coached by Jim Mora Jr. either, but...
Oh, touche. So well played, Brandon. This is a player who, look, you needed interior offensive line help. This is one of the premier interior offensive line players in this draft. I should look where he was for me on my interior offensive line rankings.
I'll tell you while you're looking that up, that one of the things that excited me, especially going through these guys, is that year after year, I watched the Seahawks unable to execute screens. And it's because maybe they can get an offensive lineman out there in space, but they can't hold his block or he can't get out there. It breaks down. This is a dude who, once he gets out into space, actually blocks the dude that he's supposed to block.
Yeah, he's athletic on the move. Again, he's bringing power against, at that point, smaller players, and they have very little hope because, like you said, he can hit his targets. He can hit his mark on the move, and that is a hard thing to do. I was just on a show yesterday where we were talking about vision from a guard, and that's a weird concept to a lot of people. You talk about vision, it's usually quarterbacks or running backs, right? but guards need it too. And, they need to be able to execute on the move and say, hey, am I hitting this guy with my inside hand, my outside hand? Is he, widening? Am I just going to keep pushing him, or am I going to tighten up my wrap here and let the running back come tight around me? And that means I've got to execute a little bit of a different block. That all happens dynamically on the move. And some guys are really good at it, have very, I would say, natural feel for that. And some guys obviously do not. Some guys, just like some quarterbacks, see it very well as guards, but then can't athletically execute it, like quarterbacks who don't have the arm to throw the window they see down the field. Haynes has good vision, and he is an excellent athlete. He was 4th in my interior offensive line rankings. He was the first really true guard. If you're talking about guards on that list, the other two above him were centers. And then I had one of the tackles I thought would be a better guard. He was number 1. He got drafted as a tackle. So if you're talking about pure guards, Christian Haynes was the first pure guard on my interior offensive line rankings list. Seahawks come away with 2, what I would call premier talents in their first 2 picks, even though it's not in the first 2 rounds.
Right. Yeah. And I think that was, when you're looking at the strategy, we talked about it in real time as it was happening, and having that ability to maybe take a guy like Troy Fautanu, who you would probably project then to move in at guard, because you hope everything's fine with Abe Lucas, but having that ability to also play tackle could have been nice, but you weren't going to get an interior defensive player like Byron Murphy by waiting to the 3rd round.
No, your options would have been more limited, and quite frankly, the window or the envelope that defensive player could play in would be narrower. He's not going to have the same range of skills that Byron has. That's why Byron went in the top half of the 1st round. And some other player that you might get who has good skills, you're still going to get skilled players, but they're not going to be as able to be deployed as widely as somebody like Byron Murphy.
Well, we go on to round 4, where maybe one of the more, controversial or unexpected Seahawksy pick, even though Pete Carroll's no longer the coach. Maybe it was John Schneider all along, but also a little bit of Mike Macdonald in this one too, I have to think, because it is a linebacker. Mike Macdonald, known for being a former linebacker, and they take Tyrice Knight, linebacker out of Texas El Paso.
I like Tyrice Knight. He was a guy that caught my eye fairly early in the process, just based on movement skills. I hadn't really watched a lot of his tape, but the first tape I was exposed to, I was like, this is interesting. He moves a lot, and they moved him a lot around the formation. Now, I didn't make the connection at that point to Macdonald or any other defensive schemes because I hadn't watched enough tape. But when I went back and watched Tyrice Knight in combine prep, I was like, no, there's something there. I don't think this is one of those gems that's going to get vaulted way up to the 2nd round, but man, he's really interesting. And when it all comes together on his tape, that movement and explosion, and he's in the right place and he sees it the right way, you get some really explosive plays for the defense. And that was what kept bringing me back. And we were on the field at the combine, and Brett said, "Who the hell is that?" And I said, "That's Tyrice Knight." And he said, "I'm going to have to watch him when I get home." And I was like, yeah, it's exactly the way I felt when I first saw his tape like a month and a half ago. It was like, who is this? Like, he's not on any of my lists. And I added him to my list at that point. But the more I thought about it, and when they selected him, the first thing I thought of was all those defenders that they use kind of, I call it off the triangle in the corner that Mike Macdonald uses. Sometimes they're in line. Sometimes they're actually what you would consider like the old Sam linebacker, where they're behind a defensive end. And other times they're out in space, almost as like a slot defender or a wide 9 on the edge. And you never really know what they're going to do, because Baltimore would sometimes leave that guy in short zone pass coverage. Sometimes they would blitz him as a sort of secondary blitzer. And they love guys with that role versatility. And I was like, oh man, Tyrice Knight's going to be so fun in that role. And there's another guy in UDFA that's the same way, kind of fits the same profile physically, and also got moved around in his defense. And as soon as I saw his name, I was like, that's Mike. Saw that guy on tape and went, hey, we know what to do with these guys. We've used them for years in Baltimore. Give me that guy in the case for Tyrice Knight, or those guys when you look at the UDFA haul as well. He really likes those versatile kind of chess piece players that he can move around depending on down and distance to really surprise an offense. Mike throws some wild stuff at people. And it's one of the real strengths of his defensive play calling. You never really know what's coming from where. And that requires players who don't tip that off, who, oh, if this guy's lined up here, he's definitely rushing. And then an offense can sort of play off of that or set up to defend that. And look, if you move that guy around into 3 different spots and he does 2 different things in each of those spots, you don't really know before the play. And it makes it very difficult to, I'll say, defend as an offense trying to protect your quarterback.
I think part of it for me, going back and watching some of his stuff, is that I didn't know whether to think if he was slow to react or if he was just patient, if that was that combination of patience and instinct. Because my initial reaction was, this guy he seems a little slow when I compared him to kind of other guys in that range.
Yeah, he's not super slow physically, like athletically.
Yeah,
he's not super slow. But a lot of that, especially with defensive players, we were just talking about one pre-show. Juwan Briggs put out a thing by himself on Twitter and said, look, I can't wait until somebody lets me loose to rush a passer, because this year I was asked to play contain. This year I was asked to 2-gap. This year I was like, I've never been asked to just flat out penetrate. I can do it, but I never got to do it. And we see guys like that every year in schemes who are like, man, is it just that they're not being asked to, or is it that they can't? And physically he can, but yeah, there's a lot of plays where on tape where it kind of looks like he just kind of stands up and moves forward a couple spots because he is literally given sort of a zone contain on the edge. And until the play starts to move, decidedly away from him and he can break that contain, he just kind of has to stay there. And you're like, man, like rush the passer. But that's not his job. His job is literally to sort of hold that edge and corral anything that comes at him. So sometimes on tape, you see him sort of stand up and just kind of put his arms up and you're like, do something. And he is doing something. He's doing what he's asked to do.
Well, it kind of fits in with our next guy that we'll talk about in round 4, pick number 121, AJ Barner, tight end out of Michigan. Not really asked to catch a whole lot of passes, but when you compare him to Will Dissly, and I feel like it's a match. I mean, it fits, right? What he's going to be asked to do is be that Will Dissly role. I said I don't think that he has and maybe just because I haven't seen it either, that pass blocking edge potential that I think Will Dissly was really good at, but he does a lot of things really well in AJ Barner. And I went back and I watched the game against Michigan where he caught, almost double-digit passes, and they had him lined up in line. They had him lined up in the slot. They had him lined up outside. So he's a guy who is very versatile and able to do a lot of different things.
I'm going to tell you right now, AJ Barner is a blocker.
He caught 100%. More passes in college than Will Dissly did.
I understand that. And the argument that we were just giving about scheme, Dissly is a better receiver. Like literally Brett compared him to Will on our live stream. And I was like, yeah, without the pass catching, like he's as good as a blocker. He is not a great receiver. So started out at Indiana, moved to Michigan, is one of, if not the premier blockers at tight end in this class. Like that is his calling card. He is a blocker and he is damn good at it. And that is how they're going to use him. And if they get any receiving out of him as a benefit, as an extra, it is pure frosting on the cake. I don't think they're necessarily expecting it. Again, when
I
you
don't know
look
if
at
I want it, EJ.
When you look at his
DK Metcalf, we got Jackson Smith.
Yeah, you don't really need another mouth to feed with the ball. That's for sure. They're going to use AJ as a sort of pin in the pin and pull. Like he is going to be another high level blocker that they can draw schemes around, and Grubb can put out on the edge and say, I'm fairly confident that he's going to get enough of the guy out there that Gino's not going to have to worry about it for that 2.5 seconds. So I can do what I want on this side of the formation. That's largely what he's going to do. If he sneaks out, catches a couple of first downs, catches a couple of tight ends, great. But don't pick him for your fantasy team unless you get points for blocks. So
moving on to a pair of cornerbacks, as John Schneider said after the draft, apparently they only scouted dudes from Auburn because they Nehemiah Pritchett in the 5th, and then they took an offensive lineman that we'll get to, but then they took DJ James, another cornerback out of Auburn.
Yeah, if you flip these two, I'm perfectly comfortable with it. DJ James was my favorite of the two. They are different styles. Nehemiah Pritchett
Yeah.
was a guy the
More of the
Bears
press
looked out
corner,
as
right?
well. Yeah, he's the longer, sort of taller, more physical. DJ, well, I shouldn't say more physical. DJ is incredibly physical and really feisty as a smaller player. His movement skills are better, and I thought he was more scheme agnostic. I thought he could fit in more schemes better because of how he moved and had less limitations. Pritchett, for lack of a better term, and I realize this has changed with the coaching staff moving on, is a Seahawks corner. Like the Seahawks have a type that they like
Uh-huh.
at corner. They like longer, they like press. They like guys that are physically able to move guys at the boundary, and Pritchett fits all of that. That made him more scheme dependent for me, and I just thought he was a little less skilled than DJ. It's absolutely draftable. They choose to pick Nehemiah in the 5th and DJ in the 6th. Like I said, if I swap those picks around in my mind, I'm totally fine with it. They're both good players. And, they both end up, I think, will play very different but important roles. And like DJ felt like a luxury pick to me. I'm not sure why he was there in the 6th. I had him rated at least a couple of rounds higher than that. But I think the Seahawks were just looking around going, wait a minute, DJ James is still on the board. We're in the 6th round. Like, we're loaded with corners. We don't know if we have a spot for him, but like, go get that guy. Like, that's a value.
And that's part of my question too, with both of these guys. For one, for a pair of corners who allowed as few catches as they did in the SEC,
Mm-hmm.
why were they still there in round 5 and 6?
Pritchett actually was drafted about where I thought he was going to be, maybe even a little bit high. I sort of started his range in about the 5th and knew that he'd be drafted. So that really is like 5th to 7th. 7th would have been a tremendous value. 6th would have been about right for me. 5 is fine. It's not too early. If they'd picked him in the 4th, I would have been like, they saw something I didn't. But SEC is one thing. They have great competition for sure, but you're really looking at traits and how they translate. And like I said, when the Seahawks picked a corner and he's a Seahawksy corner, he fits their kind of traits, but other teams are looking at him going, that's not really what we want. So I wasn't surprised that he lasted. I was surprised about DJ, and I wonder if there wasn't something there that we don't know about, something that came up in medicals and Indy. Maybe, he was rough on coaches. I don't know. We don't know any of that. I have no idea what it is, but just based on tape alone, DJ should have gone, in my mind, above Nehemiah and probably in the 4th. The fact that he was still there in the 6th, I think the Seahawks literally looked at the board and went, whoa, wait, we picked his running mate. It's a round later and he's still there. Like, what's our grade on this guy? Like, wasn't it really good? And they're like, yeah. And they were like, well, just pick him. Like, it represents a value at this point on the board. We're comfortable with whatever that is. We'll figure it out. And they're going to have to. They're loaded at defensive back. There are a lot of players back there.
They're loaded, particularly at corner, and they didn't take
Yeah.
any safeties, and so was one of my other questions too. Like, which I know they talked about moving Kobe Bryant to safety even prior to the arrival of Mike McDonald. So,
I have a theory about that.
yeah.
But I'll save it until we get to UDFAs because it concerns one of them directly.
All right. We will save it then. Let's talk about Satoa Laumea, guard out of Utah.
I hate to scout helmets, but he is a Utah guard. Just like I said, Nehemiah was a Seahawks corner. Like, Laumea is a Utah guard. He is a massive human being, super duper strong. I think better in the run game. His pass game's functional, but it's based on strength and latching on to guys. Movement skills, good. He's a good athlete at his size, but he's a brawler. He wants to get in a fight, and he's good at it. Like, that's his game. He wants to, drag a guy in close and get in a fight because he can probably win it.
I've heard the comparisons to Breno Giacomini already.
Really? I hadn't made the connection. So they're going to get what they're going to get, which is, I think they list him as a tackle. We'll see. I'm not so sure about it.
I think they talked about him being at guard despite listing him as tackle.
Yeah, I feel like his best life in the NFL, if he's going to have one, is inside. He projected that way for me. And again, this is about the proper range. I wasn't surprised that A, he was still there, or B, that he hadn't gone earlier. I was like, oh yeah, 6th round. Laumea went, okay, cool. I was most interested in what they listed him at. They listed him at tackle, but like I said, I think think most people are kind of like scratching that out and replacing it with a G.
Uh-huh.
And that would fit. He has an opportunity to play on this team, and he's one of those guys I think might take a little while. We'll see how long, but I think when he probably gets in the game, whenever that is, maybe late this year with some injuries, or maybe it's early next year after camp or whatever. It's one of those guys going to get in the lineup and just kind of be hard to displace, just like he is on run plays. So,
how many players from Findlay did you have on your draft board, EJ?
I had 0 players from Findlay. I did not watch Michael Derell. No. And that, somebody asked me at the end of day 2, they're like, EJ, how many guys got picked in the first round that you hadn't watched? And I was proudly able to say 0.
I think I was tuned in on day 3 when you got to the first guy.
Yeah. And I said, but look, that's going to change tomorrow. Like, it always changes on day 3. Usually the Patriots blew it up with like a 3rd round safety I'd never heard of out of some small school in the 3rd, but that tradition is over now that Bill's not there. So it's always some other team. But I told the person that asked the question, it doesn't matter how many people you watch. One year I watched 450, and there were still guys that I hadn't seen, because somebody always pulls somebody else from somewhere else, and you're like, and you just hope it's not in like the 3rd round, right? If it's the 4th or the 5th round, like, again, it's dealer's choice. Teams have scouts everywhere. They certainly have more time and money than I do, and they're always going to pull some. You can't really let that throw you. You want to get most, but yeah, by the time you get down in round 6 and they pick a tackle out of Findlay, you're like, okay, cool. I'll watch it later. Like, great, cool, neat. He looks big. I'll tell you that. Like, I saw a still photo of him, and those shoulders
has lots of traits of that you would like out of an offensive lineman. I haven't heard if he plays basketball, but I would assume that he does.
Yeah, well, would be tough to displace in the paint for sure. But no, I did not get to watch Michael Derell. But overall, top to bottom, I thought it was a really interesting draft. Again, you kind of have to look at it. This draft had a shelf of talent that was about at 160, 175, depends on who you're talking to, and depends also what you're looking for position wise. But in general, there was a pretty big talent break right around there. And so when I was going back and looking at all the classes in the draft, there were so many classes that I was like, love the first guy, love the second guy, I'm okay with the 3rd guy. And then I was like, oh, but they really didn't do anything in the later rounds. Then I'd go to the next team and I'd be like, love the first guy, love the second guy. I didn't like the 3rd guy. And they didn't do anything in the later rounds. So I got to like the 4th or 5th team, and I was like, dude, you're literally looking at the shelf that you said was there. Like, there's not as many guys below that. So the drafts that really stood out to me as the sort of best top to bottom drafts were guys that they had hits all the way through 5th, 6th, 7th, and top to bottom. They got guys that I think are going to contribute, fit with their football team. And there were more than a few of those, but they really stood out from, it felt like just about every team. I really thought the first couple of picks were all right. And then the ones that really stayed for me as sort of best drafts it was like, I just kept going. And it was like, oh, yeah. And there's, 6 or 7 guys in the draft class, and I didn't like one. And it was just more like, I would have picked a different flavor. Like, those were the best drafts. So I thought it was a really good draft. I thought it was representative of the changeover to Mike McDonald, certainly. And, up high, it's very difficult to argue with. Like, you start off with, again, Murphy and Haynes, and then I happen to like Tyrice Knight. That was where a lot of people were like, oh, I don't like it anymore. But I was like, oh, I like that guy, and he actually fits with what they're trying to do. So I thought it was a fun draft.
Yeah, I think because was it Gray that went shortly after they traded back with Denver?
And Cedrick Gray?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
No, Trevon Wallace went earlier.
Yeah, Trevon and Cedrick both went a lot earlier than a lot of people thought they were going to go all draft season. And those were 2 of my guys that I originally had down on my linebacker board. But the first time, like I said, kind of like Tyrice, when I watched Cedrick Gray, I was like, what am I missing? Like, this he's one of the more well-rounded linebackers in the class. I like him. Can make plays going forward. He's good against the pass. There were a lot of linebackers in this class that did either or. Inside linebacker was sort of famously maligned in this class as the worst position group. And I don't think that's necessarily unfair, but that means when you find somebody that a lot of people aren't talking about, you're like, huh. And there were 3 guys. Cedrick Gray was one. Trevon Wallace was another, who was He's more on the potential side. He was more on the athletic side. And again, when everything hit with that explosion, you were like, holy cow, he's got to round off the rough edges. And then the guy that I found late in the process was Jordan McGee from Temple. And he also went fairly high because he is, again, a dynamic playmaker that can make explosive plays for the defense, which if you look at statistically how important that is at killing drives, getting any kind of explosive play for the defense, whether that's a TFL, whether that's a sack, a hurry, a pressure, forced fumble, any of that stuff, your chance for killing that drive goes way up. And he's one of the guys that can create those kind of plays, and nobody was talking about him. And again, there were some rough reads and some other things, but when he got there, he had the size, the speed, and the range to go do that. And I was like, NFL decision makers love that stuff. And all three of those guys ended up going quite a bit higher than a lot of people had them, certainly like a month out from the draft. I was still seeing those guys down at like the 150s, the 170s. Trevon Wallace was in the 230s for like the first 2 to 3 months. I was like, oh, wow, guys, come on. He's better than
Wallace
that.
and Gray were like my shelf, I felt like, at linebacker, but I hadn't watched any of
No, you're right. Below that, you were getting, again, guys with narrow bands of traits, but in terms of all-arounders, it dropped off pretty quickly because, again, inside linebacker was not super deep in this class.
Right. And it was a need for the team. And so the fact that it got addressed when it did, hopefully they address it with a guy who's going to be able to give you starting snaps. But if not, they've made some work in free agency, and maybe they made some work in terms of undrafted free agents. Although I don't see any linebackers on your list of guys that you love for you.
Not really. So the closest is probably Houston defensive end Nelson Caesar. And he is like Tyrese. He's the guy I was talking about, that when you go back to Houston tape, they move him around off that corner, just like the Baltimore defense does, or, the Michigan defense when Mike was there. Like, they have that guy, that kind of roamer off the edge that's like old Sam linebacker size, but does some straight up edge rushing, does some edge setting, does some floating to the middle and waiting and doing delayed blitzes as a true linebacker, not as a defensive lineman. Nelson Caesar is kind of Tyrese light, if you want to call him that, and had a bunch of production against quality opponents doing that stuff. So I think McDonald took one look at that and went, oh yeah, like, give me that guy for free. Sure. Give me that guy. So in terms of linebackers, that I would call him a linebacker more than I would call him a defensive end. Kind of like we had the tackle guard debate, but that's probably as close as it gets. But the guys that really stood out to me, I'll just run through the names and then we can go through them, as many of them as you want. Boise State running back George Alani. I liked him. Actually, his press agent reached out to me during this draft cycle and was like, hey, do you want to have him on the show? And I had watched him and I was like, he's really good, but we kind of do our player interviews before that. And I said, hey, are you still going to be working with George after the draft? Because if he ends up in an interesting place, we might do something with him over the summer. And she was like, yeah, I do. And I was like, all right. So interesting little connection with Holani, but we'll talk about him. Washington, I put tight end in air quotes. It's really H-back Jack Westover. South Dakota State offensive lineman, tackle Garrett Greenfield. We talked about Nelson Caesar. Grambling State defensive end Sundiata Anderson, or Sonny. He's fantastic. I've been watching him for a couple of years. And then Arizona State defensive back Roe Torrance. And if you want a bonus player, because I know you love your Vandals, we'll talk about Hayden Hatton.
Okay. Hayden Hatton. Yeah, they go with the Boise running back, the Idaho wide receiver. A lot of these guys are Pacific Northwest. I guess
Washington.
Sure. With Westover. So let's start off with Westover, because I think that local connection has some Seahawks fans excited.
Westover was a gem on my board, down the board. He did not make my offensive gems, but I loved Westover. In fact, I campaigned one of the All-Star game directors to bring him to the game. And he said to me, EJ, I can't do it. And I said, why? He's a great player. Well, he said he's not going to get drafted. Like, he's just not going to get drafted, and that counts against my stats. And I was like, I get it. I understand, but he's a great player. And he is a great player, and he's super useful, and he does not fit a mold. He is not a tight end. He is an H-back, and he can play a little bit of fullback. He can play a little bit of tight end. He can do a lot of the stuff you do with use check. He's not going to do it at that level. that they do in San Francisco, but like he is that kind of utility role player, and he was fantastically efficient for Washington. He did all kinds of things they needed right when he needed them, or right when they needed him to do it. And I love Westover. As I would watch Huskies games or snips of Husky games, I would always see Westover making a play, making a block, making a little catch for, 3rd and 3 connection, celebrating like crazy. He's a glue guy, for lack of a better term. And he's so useful. You're going to be able to use him with the new kickoff rules on special teams as a tackler or a blocker, either way. So he's going to be a 2-phase special teamer on kickoffs right away. And you can do so many things with him in that sort of versatile role. You can use him as a personal protector for Geno. You can sneak him out on little chip leak routes. Just love his versatility, love his toughness. And he always kind of gets the right thing done. Just love Westover. And again, credit to the director. He did not get drafted. That was a good call on his part, but I didn't keep me from stumping for him. I thought he's a great player. I think he is a great player, and it's really cool that he ended up with the hometown Hawks.
Yeah, that's really cool. Hayden Hatton, the wide receiver.
Oh, man.
Idaho. I have not watched any of him, but I'm curious to know.
I watched him a little bit right before the draft, just kind of as not even a full study. Certainly didn't write a report out on him, but just kind of like, hey, who is this guy? How does he move? Incredibly prolific. Tons and tons of stats. He has a big frame. I don't know if they're going to leave him at wide receiver, and he is slow. He is slow. Now, against a lot of the defensive backs that Idaho faced, that was fine. He still worked and got open. The other thing is
Jake Bobo slow, though, right?
See, here's the thing. I thought about making the Bobo comparison, and Bobo's testing famously happened in the rain, and he's faster than that on tape. Like Bobo is faster than that on tape, and he's faster than that on the field. I don't think Hatton's faster than that on the field. I think he is indeed slow. And that's going to be not a death sentence in the NFL, but you're going to have to play very differently. And it also means that I'm not the only one. I mean, if I took 5 minutes and saw that, everybody else saw it too, which is why he didn't get drafted. And if he does end up to make this team, let's just put it that way, he is going to have to do one thing in practice, and that is beat press. He has got to beat press in practice, or else he's not going anywhere. And there is not a lot of press on his tape. There is some man, but there is not a lot of press on his tape. There are a lot of free releases and I'm not exactly sure what opposing defensive coordinators were thinking, but I think that a lot in college. For a guy that comes in and you look at the stat sheet and he's filling it up, like he's at Idaho and he's got 600 yards in the middle of the season, or he's got 800 yards, and you're heading towards the playoffs, and you're like, I don't think we're going to press this guy. It's like really tall and really slow. Like, I don't think we're going to press him. And I'm like, do you just not have anybody that can press? Like nobody? You probably press him with a linebacker, and the linebacker is going to keep up. But he just, there were some examples, few and far between, of what I watched where he did beat press, but it wasn't really fast enough to keep the route on time. And I mean NFL time. And there is a huge jump between college and the pros. He made a lot of plays running around, bailing his quarterback out. And like, good on him. He's a great college football player. Again, highly productive. Not sure it's going to translate. That's why he didn't get drafted. And unless he can beat press in practice, he's not going anywhere, because I don't think anybody's going to hold on to him, especially when you have a Jake Bobo on the roster who plays a very similar role and is faster and has found success already. Like, that's the guy you're trying to knock off if you're Hayden Hatton, and you're going to have your work cut out to do it. And I'm not sure. And the first thing they're going to do is line him up against one of those legions of defensive backs they have now and go, all right, straight up, head up, put your hand on him, press, go. Who wins? And if you just drowned in your first 6 to 10 press reps, might be a real short stay for Hayden Hatton.
One of the guys I feel like is going to transfer well to the NFL level, just because I think South Dakota State is a heavy run team. Garrett Greenfield.
I am so excited about this. Okay. Full transparency.
Yeah.
I know Garrett. Like I interviewed him at Shrine Bowl. Yeah. And that interview's on the Bootleg channel. If you're a Seahawks fan, go check it out. It was our first ever combo interview, because we interviewed Mason McCormick, who is now a Pittsburgh Steeler, and Garrett, because they played on the left side at South Dakota State for something like 40 straight starts together.
Okay.
Like Mason has 51 starts at left guard, and Garrett was there for almost all of it. They played together for like 5 years on the left side of that line. So we were like, we got to get these guys together and have them talk about each other and just talk about how they work together on the same side. It was a great interview, came out amazing. But I know Garrett, and he was one of the guys that I kind of kept checking in with over the week, he and Mason. And then afterwards, I like wished him well. I saw him at the combine and just was like, hey, hope you kill it. And then, before draft, I was like, hey, we're rooting for you guys, and just kind of kept up. And then I saw that he didn't get drafted, which obviously is a shot at player. I thought he actually would. I thought he compares very favorably physically to me, to a young Brian O'Neill. If they didn't take
somebody from Findlay, maybe they could have taken a South Dakota State lineman.
Well, we'll see who sticks. I wouldn't bet against Garrett. He is a very good football player. He reminds me of a young Brian O'Neill. Like college Brian O'Neill. And a lot of people said Brian O'Neill, a lot of tools. He's great. Needs a little bit of polishing. And then Brian O'Neill became Brian O'Neill. But Garrett is a fantastic player. He's very experienced. He's got great movement skills. He's got really good size. And once I saw he got picked up and he was coming to Seattle, I was really excited. So I DM'd him and said, hey man, congratulations. I think you're going to do great. I said, by the way, can you play right tackle? Cause he was a left tackle all through college. And he was like, yes, sir. And I was like, good. That's going to be very helpful to your cause. So, when he gets up here and gets settled, we'll probably connect. I'll probably take him out and buy him dinner, or maybe he'll buy me dinner. I don't know what a UDFA salary is, but we'll probably get together. I really like Garrett. He's a great guy, and he let us into his world, which is very gracious. And I'm forever thankful to him and Mason for that, because they're tremendous players, and they were very generous with their time.
Definitely got to check out that interview. I wanted to save running back for last because I know that's your favorite. So let's hit on Torrance from Arizona State here real quick.
Yeah, Rowe is the guy I was talking about that I think might make the move to safety.
Okay.
Now, Torrance, tall defensive back out of Arizona State. He's got, I would say, really good ball awareness, but he is also, he's a good blitzer. He's a long DB that likes to press. And again, that is a Seahawksy corner, but his fluidity can be challenged, especially by like double moves. And like you said, they're super heavy at corner. So I was like, and I know Rowe's agent. And so I was like, hey, congratulations. I saw Rowe ended up in Seattle, and she was excited about that. And I didn't ask at the time, but as I was watching tape on Rowe to get ready for this, I was like, hey, what if they have a move to safety in mind for him? What if they make him a box safety? And I started watching with that perspective, or those glasses on. And he's a good blitzer, not a ton of burst, but long strides, get him to the quarterback really quickly, can make good impact. I mean, he can connect when he gets there. And I thought, and then it kind of light went off, and I was like, oh, what if they think he's Kyle Hamilton light? Like very light, but what if they're going to use him in the Kyle Hamilton role? And I went, oh, I like that. Like, I like his chances of being around a whole lot better if he can fulfill even, 50, 60% of that, because Kyle Hamilton is all pro player at safety. And Torrance has some of those flashes when he's around the line of scrimmage and he gets to blitz, which again, cornerbacks don't get to do all the time, but he did it at Arizona State, and he was pretty effective when he did it. And that was the flash that kind of made me go, oh, that might be the path. His path to the practice squad or this roster.
Sure. Well, we'll have to see about that. The one running back, though, I was excited about, especially when I saw him on your list, DJ, and I went back and watched a little bit of George Alani out of Boise. It hurt my eyes because of the blue field.
The blue field,
I did get through. And when you talk about guys who are light versions of other guys, he reminded me a lot of a light version of Kenneth Walker because of his ability his balance was super good. He's got a little bit of shiftiness to him. And
quite a bit, actually.
Yeah. For a running back out of Boise, it kind of surprised me a little bit that he went undrafted after watching him.
Yeah, he can string moves together, much like Kenneth Walker. I had said pre-draft that my favorite thing about Kenneth Walker wasn't the first move, it was the second move. The first move would get him by somebody, but the second move would break it wide open, and then he would go for 40 or 60 or whatever. And Alani is a guy that can string together 2, 3, 4 moves throughout a run. And I think he developed that ability because he doesn't have top gear. Like, if you're wondering why he went undrafted, he does not have a fifth gear. He will get caught. But I know
reminded me a
that's
little bit of Chris Carson in that way. Yeah.
I know a lot of people are like, oh, because everybody loves a fast running back. But you don't need to be fast to play running back well, even in the NFL. You can make a lot of yards in between the tackles, creating missed tackles, finding lanes and pressing them for 5-10 yards. That's the work of an NFL running back. I understand the cheers come from the 80-yard burst for a touchdown, and it's super fun. But that's not going to be Alani's bread and butter in the NFL. He is going to be a workhorse that is going to find and make and create yards for himself. And he can do that. And he's super fun. Like you said, he's got balance, got great footwork. He's physical. He understands how to use them in combination to use that quick burst and bounce and then pull through what's left of a tackle, even if he doesn't, dodge it completely. And he was very effective. And like you said, super fun to watch. Like, when his agent reached out, I went back and I was like, dude, this kid's a player. Like, this is fun. This is definitely a guy that could find a role in an NFL backfield. It's tough to do. Like, there's more players than there are spots for running back in the NFL, unlike offensive tackle, where, look, if you've got a pulse and you're 6'7", we'll take you. No, Alani's a lot of fun, and I think he's a good player. I think, he's probably going to end up being a practice squad player, just looking at their depth, but you never know. There's a lot of injuries at running back. I think he'll impress in camp and certainly in the preseason games, because he has a very fun style and he will break a couple, and they won't go all the way, but they'll go for like 20 yards and people get really excited. And then they'll be like, we've got to keep George Alani. Somebody will steal him.
Well, I think about that, with, DJ Dallas, him going away from the team and his ability on special teams. And he wasn't, the thing I didn't really care for as much with DJ is that he was kind of a guy who went down on first contact a lot of the time. And Alani is kind of the opposite of that. Like, he is looking to move off of that contact, and because he has that balance, then he's able to create that extra. And so, man, if he can use some of that in special teams, then you're talking a spot on the team.
Especially with the new kickoff rules, it would help if you had a little bit more speed, but speed is going to be less important on kickoffs than ever. And the ability to make a cut and make people miss, even if it's just one cut, those are going to be the players that end up returning on special teams under the new rules. It's going to be much more like a running play, and special teams coaches are going to design them that way, where they're going to have pullers, where they're going to be trying to create a crease, one gap. It's not going to be like the old sort of prototype for a kick returner. Now, punt returner is going to still rely on agility. Again, not necessarily top end speed. You got to be able to dodge dynamically in a whole different way. But like one cut and go running backs are going to be the new sort of meta for kickoff returners under the new rules. And that means more roles for guys like Alani and others who, might have only been, they're on that line between RB3 and RB4. And do we keep them? And now, like, oh, well, he's a guy that can get us field position on kickoffs with that skill. Yeah, maybe we keep him instead of, a fifth safety, or whatever way it works out. Do you want to talk about Grambling State defensive end Sundiata Anderson? Been watching him for 2 years.
Let's not leave him off.
He is a great player. First off, biggest smile you've ever seen in your life, and he wears it all the time. Like, I swear that guy is just continually happy. He's an infectious dude to be around. He loves playing football. He's thrilled by the whole bit. And I love that about him. But first saw him on tape last year, was really hoping he'd come out. He chose to go back to Grambling for one more year. Really athletic in terms of his length, his ability to use it. He is still polishing things up, but man, he has some tremendous flashes on tape. He had them last year. I think he has a real chance to stick with Mike Macdonald, because again, they sort of take rushers in all types and sizes, or they have, at least in Baltimore, and that's what we're going off of here. They were not one of those super standards and prototypical team where it was like, they're always going to take the little fast guy, or they're always going to take the hulking guy with the longish arms. Baltimore found ways to use like guys that were built like squares, that were super thick, little fast guys, taller guys. Like they just found a way to use guys to the best of their ability. And Sonny has a ton of ability. Like some people will talk about level of competition, but even when he played upper end competition, you could still see the traits coming through and the skill. He's not just a traits based guy. I really think he probably should have been drafted. This is, again, Seahawks picking up dollars that other people dropped. I would be very surprised if he's not on their practice squad at least.
Well, I was kind of surprised. I mean, you look at the list of guys that, because you went team by team. If you go to follow EJ at Football EJ out on Twitter, you went team by team and selected each one of the undrafted free agent guys for each one that you liked. And, we went through a list of 7 names there.
Seahawks had one of the better hauls. UDFA is one of my favorite process, actually, in all of sports, because it's not really like anything else. The draft is regimented. You have to go where you're picked. And then as soon as it ends, actually, well before it ends, agents and teams are on the phones and are saying, hey, if you don't get drafted, we want you. We're going to make you a priority. We're going to give you a bonus. We want you more than the other guys. We've got an opening. Our guy's not here. It's, the job's open. And they're doing all those things. And all these guys, these young guys, are trying to figure out like where their best opportunity is. Do they know a coach? Do they have another player on the team? Is it close to home? Does the system style match their skills? Who else is on the roster? I mean, that was the other thing about Torrance is I was like, wow, I'm really surprised he chose to go to Seattle because they have a ton of corners. It's going to be really tough to crack that roster. And I just couldn't figure it out. And then I was watching, I was like, oh, they don't think he's a corner. They think he's like 3/5 of Kyle Hamilton, which is plenty good. And I was like, oh, okay, that seems way smarter. I mean, maybe it was his only offer. I doubt it given his pedigree, but there's just all that. And that's all going on in like a 2-hour period. It's like a complete Wild West show. Agents kind of hate it because they literally have like 3 phones going and, offers come and go as other guys sign and dollars and spots go away. And it's just this super frenetic, but it's free talent. Like it's literally, you don't have to pay anything for it from draft capital, and you can really improve your team. And look, the Seahawks historically, one of the teams that's used that process to its absolute fullest extent. I mean, there was a year, 2 or 3 years into, Pete and John's tenure where 60% of the Seahawks roster was undrafted free agents.
Yeah.
Like that's incredible. Like, and those teams were very successful. So if you're open to giving guys a shot and your scouting network, is beating the bushes and scouring all the lower level all-star games and everything else, and Finley, like you're going to find talent, and the Seahawks have done a great job. So I'm never really surprised when they have a good UDFA class. I'm not really surprised when they have big UDFA classes because they take this process really seriously, and it's paid off for their football team.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be starting level talent. I mean, if you get 1 or 2 of these guys that end up being starters, then you're ecstatic, but
you're ahead of the game.
It's filling out the depth too. And so that can be, it can be, end up being a competitive advantage.
Yeah. There's a couple guys on this. Actually, I think there's 3. Sonny might end up on the practice squad. I would be shocked if Garrett doesn't make this roster. Like, he's a really good player. I was very surprised he wasn't drafted. And look, if they need to, put Abe on the pup with his knee or something, like Garrett's making this roster. Westover he's just so sticky in terms of roster. Like he can do so many things. And they always say the more you can do, like just on utility alone, like he's going to be down near the tail end. He's going to be one of the last guys cut if it's that thing, but I bet he stays. And if you get 3 guys off UDFA that make your 53 or are going to be on your practice squad bouncing up given the week, right? With the new practice squad rules, you can elevate guys. And it's much more flexible than it used to be. If you have basically 3 guys in play on your 53 off 1 UDFA class, you crushed it.
Well, I'm excited to watch and see some more Garrett Greenfield. EJ, if people want to check out your YouTube channel there on Bootleg Football, where do they go? How do they find that interview?
Yeah, all they need to do is go to Bootleg Football, go to YouTube, type in Bootleg Football. It'll pop right up. Head to the channel. It was published right before the draft, so it's still probably in the top line feed. If not, you can slide down to the 2024 draft category, scroll back a little bit. You'll see it. Big picture of Mason and Garrett right on the cover in their South Dakota State gear, their Jackrabbit stuff. So they're great guys. It's a short interview, get the whole thing done in 13, 14 minutes, got some film in it, with them explaining what's going on and why they did what they did. And yeah, they're really, really gracious, dude. We threw some fun stuff in there about what's your favorite food. If you're trying to keep weight on during camp, what's your go-to meal? So you can find that out about them as well. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and you guys do a lot of fun stuff coming up on Bootleg Football. I know you have your team previews coming up this summer, and I know I'm going to be watching to see if the Seahawks make that top 5 draft list this year, EJ.
We may have recorded that episode. We may have recorded that episode yesterday, so I may or may not know the answer to that question.
Whether or not they're on there or not, it's an episode worth checking out because you can find out about other teams around the NFL, which is a great thing about tuning into Bootleg Football. Always appreciate having you on, EJ. It's a real good time every time.
Every time. I appreciate the opportunity.
And I think with that, there's only one thing left to say. Go Hawks.